Galactic, bringing you another science presentation in cosmic science where we're studying the inner and outer edge. These are the only two edges in spherical space, but we have two problems with that geometry for the universe. The center, if there is one, would be distributed. That has been identified in my geometry as the proton, the only space particle, but it's time to elaborate on that to see how we can get scientific results, experimental verification, either from what is already known or perhaps experiments in the future, to validate a more reasonable geometry for physics, currently using linear geometry, which I've identified as the source of most, if not all, the problems in physics today. The wrong mathematics, the wrong number system, the wrong geometry because geometry has been lost. Let's see if we can recover some of that perceptibility, that orientation toward the universe, that it is geometric, not necessarily mathematical. And that's the lab cat going to her perch. She will spring in a moment as soon as she is. We'll pause here and give her a moment to collect herself. Maybe you want some water from my cup. And she's up on her ledge. All right. By the way, this rash you see right here, that is not, as I was tempted to put it to any observer who might ask, you have to take one punch before you get in there and get them down on the ground and end the fight. You got to take one punch, and that's what this is? No, that's from the cat. She loves me, and she sleeps with me, and she came to me the night before last and just sat right here while I was basically sideways and just licked. Over a period of about 20 minutes, she just, with her sandy tongue, just licked me because she likes me, and that she left this rash, which I like because it'll heal, I presume. Anyway, life is always at many levels, isn't it? It's quite artificial to be studying the universe when you think about what's going around you in the world, what's going on. It's like you're studying the universe while people are dying in all these places and injustice is everywhere. And, there's death. And how can you be studying the universe? Well, because you have your things to do and we scientists have ours. We like to think it's all going to fit, but I've already been over that. We're blueprinted to do this. This is a divine imperative, because we're not just emotional creatures, although you must say that that is dominant in one respect, because love is certainly not logical. Some people have attempted to argue with me on that, because they see the hole in my argument, because there's always a hole in any absolute argument. But love is most easily categorized as that which is in the other subsystem of a human. Well, what about the logical subsystem? Well, equally divine, but it comes online in a different sequence, and not every man achieves his full capacity for rational logic. I would say, just in general, because a man is generally distracted with considerations that have to do with fear and love and everything else that goes on in life. But having given that bracketing information in a record amount of time, under 30 seconds, we can now talk about the geometry of the universe that physics just can't see. Physicists are incapable. They've been trained. You could put this extrinsically or intrinsically. It's their fault. They're liable. They're stupid. Or you could be more compassionate and say it's their environment. It's the modeling system. They're trying to make a living. There's all kinds of excuses. But once again, we have a mixture going on here. We don't want to be judges. What we want to be is right. We want to get it right. Well, then you have to ask yourself, at some point, somehow, why do you want to be right? Well, if it's because you're serving the machine or a system or a model or yourself, just your own interests, well, that's one way to deal with things. But in true science, real science, actual science, blueprinted science, what science is for, it's logic, it's rational logic, it's geometry, I've proved that. And so why has science lost geometry? For social reasons. And that's the end of that. So that ends that bracketing part. Another record delivery. I'm getting better, but still not getting to the point. Well, the point. Let's start there. You have a spherical universe. If you begin that way, you can certainly come to some more general conclusions that are more appropriate to physics than if you start with lines. Lines don't accomplish what we want, neither in cosmology, nor in quantum mechanics, nor in the perception of reality. Because if you're forcing yourself to see the universe as a grid, then you've got a massive translation problem. Because nothing in the universe is grid. Now you could say it's scale, crystals, absolutely. Well, how does that come about? Because of the combination of linear and circular and spherical geometries, which are the only three geometries known. And two of them are related, because the circle is a closed line. It's not a clothes line that you hang laundry on, it's a closed line. A straight line is highly peculiar. There's no other shape, no other geometry other than straightness, which is what makes it so useful, seen as a compromise. Because a circle can only be conceived as two numbers in a grid, unless you start with the circle as the basis of your numeric formulation. That's what I discovered. And I've got to say, it still surprises me. And there's even a possibility that I'm self-deluded. I won't know that until I get consensual feedback from scientific forum. That's how we know that we're getting things right, is because when you put out your vision, your interpretation, your equations, your geometry, whatever you're doing to formulate reality, others can check you. Very easy to be self-deceived. In a sense, it's unavoidable, but we're trying to overcome it. That's science. As opposed to strict rational logic, which applies to an individual, you can pool that and get a feedback system that's been lost. One of the proofs that it's been lost is nobody turns to geometry for solutions any longer, and I can tell you why. It's because it's considered to be metaphysical. And the reason for that misperception that geometry is metaphysical is because it's not numbers. It's not numbers. If you're talking about circles and spheres, well, then you need calculus, because calculus translates to linear reality. So we're fucked up. And that's the correct scientific characterization of our situation. Science is fucked in the ass. Fucked itself up the butt. Because we're stuck now, and we can't get out, and there's no way out, and science has failed, it's going to stay that way. There will be no solutions because of linear mathematics. That it's the Godfather now. It's part of the Godfather's ass. And you have to. You have to know numbers, and you have to translate everything into numbers. And if you would, that's the reason for the insane cosmological model. It's psychotic, has nothing to do with science, really. Because of this incredible lacuna. Let me teach you a word if you don't know lacuna. It's a mote in the eye. This is a log in your eye, okay? And so you have to use your imagination a little bit, because a mote, you hardly even see it. It's just a fleck of dust. Well, that depends on perspective. So we have a linear geometry and no other. And that's why we have calculus. That's why we have sine-cosine relationship. That's why we have complex numbers. All of these are worshipped. That's because took a wrong turn. And I can even tell you where we took a wrong turn, although it's in a time frame, the Industrial Revolution. And now you should be able to see, or you will in a moment when I spell it out, is that the Industrial Revolution was based exclusively on numbers. There was no geometry. Now, at the transition, the geometry had to become fixed. So we would have a permanent This is in retrospect we're saying this. It didn't have to be this way. We could have developed circular geometry and spherical geometry if somebody had been able to see it. There was too much pressure against it because linear geometry was paying the tab because the governments wanted it. The governments wanted industrial revolutionary progress at all costs because it's power. Because if you can control electricity, you can control the population. And this goes to spooky stuff in the long run, but it's all coming true. So we're seeing an entire world picture being built out, and now it's complete, and we failed. And there's no solution. Now that has got to rankle in the mind of any rational man because our whole orientation is hope-based, that we will have the solution that we seek. And yet nobody can define even what that solution might look like. So science has no goal. And that's why everyone currently is deluded into thinking that science is technology. Well, there's no way out now. There's no feedback system in science. Science is way too big, way too complex, way too organized, right into the educational system. We cannot get rid of our models, and the models are killing us. And the biggest, broadest base of the false model, if you just want to put it into rational terms, it's straight line geometry. So my discovery is epical, because it's a number system that accompanies the spherical geometry, a very simple number system that solves a lot of mathematical conundrums. So it's definitely correct. In the synthetic sense, when you get that many solutions from such a simple adjustment as changing to the proportional number system away from linear numbers, with linear numbers embedded in them, as it must be, or you can't have computable numbers, which you must have. So it looks like a conundrum. I solved it. What are the odds of that being accepted, recognized, any feedback? None. There is no chance of that. It's not quite true. There is always an infinitesimal possibility that my geometry could be finally understood by someone else. Anyone else! Anyone else! So it gets emotional. Yeah, I'm human. And I'm running out of time. I'm nearly 70 years old. So that's my little rant. And that's mercifully brief as well. So, to commence the right way, the axiomatic basis for an approach to reality, you begin with a sphere. There's no other way. So you're going to have to accept that. Your linear algebra is dead. In the water. And we have over a century of proof. The greatest minds of all time have thrown up their hands in despair and gone right back to their rice bowl. Well, that's fine if that's what you need. But a rational man, I'll just say such as myself, will never be satisfied with the half-assed, ridiculous, superstitious answers that we're getting every day. They're not answers. They're pure delusion. Because your entire system of approach to the universe, yeah, I could use the F word again if I wanted. Let's not go there again. It's not working. It's not working. It's never going to work. And there's no way to change it. Except my way. And that's, and we're almost done, right? Okay. So rather than give up the ship and just go back to, I got mine, mate, and the rest of you flip yourselves off, go ahead, just be whatever you need to be all you can be in a pointless universe that you'll never understand and you're misguiding anyone stupid enough to listen to you, then there's I. Do I have something better? Let's find out. Now you start with a sphere. Okay, what do you have? Well, first of all, you have two enormous problems. Because, first of all, you're going to need a number system. Well, I discovered it, so we're done with that. So now you have a sphere that's perfectly linearizable. Now, you do need the calculus, but you only need a simple differential to get linear numbers out of spherical numbers. So it's the same as having a complex number system, with the obvious exception that it's not complex. Proportional numbers are simply whole number fractions, such as 1 over 2 or 2 over 1. Those are proportional numbers. It's 2 in relation to 1, or 1 in relation to 2. Is order important? It certainly is. That's even true in linear space. It's plus or minus. Well, in spherical space, it's either reciprocal or anti-reciprocal. And those have a relationship. So there's the basis of your new math. It's the old math that's been correctly divided. The line is the function add. How do we know that? Plus infinity, minus infinity, add to 0. That magic, horrific number, which will freeze a CPU if you issue a divide by 0 instruction. A magic number in a detrimental, horrific sense. It's 0 destroys the multiply-divide relationship. How do you recover it? Use the correct object that the universe tells us to use, the sphere. And then the center of the sphere and the edge of the sphere will solve the two problems if you get it right. What's the answer? All right, let's work this out carefully and geometrically so we do get it right. You have the center of the sphere and you have the edge of the sphere, correct? What are the two problems with that? The first problem is the edge. If that's physical space, which geometry deals with, this is happening in physical space. We want to get a match on physical space. Well, a grid simply doesn't work, obviously. So there's your first clue. Your grid is shit. But that's all science uses. So science has turned to shit. And we didn't know it while we were involved in the Industrial Revolution. You know why? Because calculus covers up the error. Calculus is the compensation for the wrong geometry. Okay, so that's simple. That makes sense. There's nothing theoretic about that. So when you see that the multiply-divide pair of operators, it's one operator, it's multiply-divide, that's one operator. Just as add-subtract are exactly the same thing. You have positive and negative numbers, well, then you can have subtraction. But all you're doing is adding, right? You add plus 1 and negative 1, you add them. Well, what does that make? 0. So it's symmetric, it's balanced on add. But if you have a 0 at the center of the system, you can't use multiply and divide. The universe says that. So why do our brilliant scientists not see that? I just told you. Social reasons. You would think, would you not, that logic conquers superstition. Not when money is involved. That overpowers every man. Except me. That's the way it is. I got this, and the money lovers didn't get it. So that make all our scientists money lovers? It's up to you to decide. I'm not a judge. I'm just stating things the way they actually are. Try to give a reason for it. You can accept it or not, but I'm telling you what I know. This is the correct beginning of the mathematical system, is to realize there are two pairs of operators, making exactly two operators. Add and subtract, and multiply and divide. Add and subtract work on the line. Do multiply and divide work anywhere? Well, if they do, they don't work on the line. Neither multiplication nor division are linear operators. Multiply seems to be linear, but it's actually linear systematic as rectangles. 2 times 3 or 3 times 2, that's 2 differently oriented rectangles. So that's not linear. It's 2D. But division fucks everything up, because you can't divide by 0. Period. There are other problems having to do with the ridiculously named real number system. The level of delusion in mathematics today is inexplicable. Well, I hope I've helped to explain the painful, backward superstitious state of science today. It's the reason for the many-worlds theorem. It's the reason for the mania over the supermassive black hole, and it's the direct cause of the Big Bang nonsense. All of it's based on linear stupidity. And man has become very proud and is rich. Excuse me. So let's begin again and take another step. You have a sphere. It has an edge problem. What's the edge problem? What's beyond the edge, sucker? What's beyond the fucking edge? Well, nobody knows. Well, I do. So here's the way to attack it. It has to be computable. Well, that means it has to be finite. Because you can't compute infinity. Why not? Actually, you might be able to compute infinity if you could turn it into a rational number. But if you do, you're finitizing it. So let's go on with that train of thought. Nothing wrong yet. I haven't said anything concrete yet, but we have a sphere with an edge problem that we cannot compute the edge. Okay, that's one problem. Now look at the center. What is that? What do we call it? What is it? What is the center? There is a center, but how do you characterize the center of a sphere? We say a point, and the way we're taught in school is that is a zero dimension. That's the zeroth dimension. That uses zero. So that's wrong. And a point is not the way it's defined. There is no such thing as that point. That's been proved. And I'm not the only one who proved it. I found out halfway through my research over the past 2 years that was already indirectly proved by Ruger Joseph Boshkovich. What did he prove? What did I then solidify in an absolute mathematical geometric construction that destroys the number zero from the universe? What is that? It's the realization that the sphere has two edges. Does the line have two edges? We say so, but actually the two edges of the line that we call plus and minus infinity hit one infinity. So it has one edge. It can't. It has to have two edges. You can't have one edge in a geometric object. If you think about that, you'll realize that that is tautological. So what's the other edge of the line? The center. And that's zero. You know why it's zero? Because you need it to make numbers. And that's why we can't get rid of zero with our linear numbers. And we cannot get rid of linear numbers because they're the only computable numbers. That's been proved electronically. Well-established fact that linear numbers, absolutely magical. But when it comes to dealing with curvature, the line fails because of zero. And here's why. When you have a line, the reason you have zero is because you have an antipodal infinity, a polarized infinity in linear space. That the line induces contact with infinity. Does it not? Of course it does. But that means it has an Archimedean center. And if you attach a number to that based on add, it's zero. And that's called the additive identity. That's fundamental. Is there any other identity? There's only one other identity number. The multiplicative identity. What number is that? Well, it's not zero, is it? No, it's not zero. So what's the relationship between the line and the sphere? Which one is bigger? The sphere is, by about 2 pi. The ratio between the diameter of an infinite line and the diameter of the sphere that's associated with the infinite line, even though they're both infinity, they maintain a fixed relationship that is irrational. And that's a bozo no-no. Geometry does not use irrationality. That is the beauty of geometry. The Greeks knew that, but our modern physicists have forgotten it. Well, it's time to remember our lessons. So let's go on one more step. You have a sphere with an edge problem called physical spatial infinity. Okay? You don't know what's beyond the edge. It has no name. It has no conceptualization, no definition. It's imaginary. Bingo. Bingo. We have a mathematical interpretation of imaginarity already, but it's linear. What we need now is the analog of imaginarity in real space. We just defined it. What is beyond the edge of that sphere? Imaginary space. Begin there. This is a hypothetical step which we need to now come back and prove that it's consistent. So that's one problem. We need an edge to infinity to define the sphere, correct? This will make universal space finite. But we already know that you can't do it. You cannot do it. And so you have two kinds of space. One kind of space, and this will be mathematically substantiated, we're getting there, inside the sphere is one kind of space. What's outside the sphere is another kind of space. And there's a border. Okay? This is the axiomatic step to get a re-basis of mathematics so that we can do mathematics correctly, consistently, coherently, and completely in a closed mathematical system, which linear algebra is not. It's not closed. It has infinities. We will only have one infinity. We think. But hang on, there's still the center. The center cannot be a point. It can't be a point. Why not? Because it's a zero. It's null. It only has relative existence. Hold that thought, relativity. Let's keep going. Let's take another step. We have a finite sphere now. Is the edge defined yet? No, we haven't given it a number yet. Well, let's try to do that. Let's give the edge of the geometrical space, which is spherical, let's give the edge a number. Is it imaginary? It has to be partially imaginary because it's at the edge. Because on one side of the edge, it is imaginary. That doesn't mean unreal. That means that we can't see it directly. Hold that thought. So what's outside the sphere is imaginary space. Well, that's simple. Now, we haven't defined it yet. We'll define it with a number. We'll call the outer region that's outside the sphere, the boundary. What's on the other side is infinity. Lazy 8. But it's not linear infinity. It's not plus infinity. And it's not minus infinity. We're starting over. It's just infinity. It's our first number. And it's imaginary. Infinity is an imaginary number. Well, that seems strange because you can't use it. That's correct. You can't. Unless You can make it a proportionality. That's the answer. The proportional numbers are whole number fractions. This will be a special whole number fraction, but only half of it will be a whole number. Half in the sense that there's two numbers, related by division, correct? That's not division. That's the wrong word. We've been deluding ourselves with the word division. It's proportionality, which is a relationship. So the bottom number in the fraction is 1, right? Oh, sure, because infinity over 1 is infinity. Anything over 1 is the delinearized version of itself. In other words, 1 over 1, we all know what that is. It's 1. But it's in a different form. Okay? And this will make sense in a moment, because now we have a number for the surface. Infinity over 1. We're saying that. It doesn't mean anything yet. We're just saying it to see where it leads. This is called the hypothesis step. Or you have to suspend your critical judgment for a moment in hopes that you can tie the loop, that you can prove what you just said. But this is the order in which science does its work. You first have to guess. There's no way around it. It's called induction. More romantically, it's called going out into the cloud, into la-la land where you can lose your mind. Well, this is how you could do it. You won't. You actually have a protective mechanism, which you would have to work hard to drive yourself insane with any thought. But we do fear it. Well, that's because nature is warning us away from a certain breach of her rules, which I'm just going to tell you what it is, because this actually is something every child wants to know right away. As soon as they look up into the night sky, every single human child will ask the same question. Where's the edge? Well, you can explain that to a child if you listen to me and repeat carefully what I say, but you're going to have to digest it first, because if you just repeat what I say, you're making the biggest mistake a scientist can make. Don't ever repeat what your teachers say until you've digested it, and then if you say it the same way, fine, but at least you know what you're saying. But if you just repeat, you're a cuckoo clock. You could be repeating a lie. Oh, it happens all the time. All the time. So we have one number now. And what's the rule for proportional space? Well, we don't know yet. We haven't said. But we have a good idea. You should have figured this out by now. Well, I'll just say you might have figured this out by now. My job is to spell it out. But then you have to digest it. So let's try some digestion. So the edge has a proportional number name. We assign it a proportional number. So the surface of the sphere is infinity over 1. And that's our first declaration in our hypothesis. But now we can use the linear analog to know what to do next. Because in order to get 0, geometrically, not knowing it's 0, but just pure geometry of the line, it has two infinities that are polar opposites. Well, if you can stretch your mind enough to figure out the operator called add, then you know that plus and minus, the same thing, add to 0. And that balances the entire line on a number, right? If it's plus 1, negative 1 to get your index, then the plus 1, negative 1 add to 0. And all the other numbers to infinity, inclusive, add to 0. So that's the center of the line. We can prove that that is the same position as the center of the enclosing sphere. But does it have the same numeric quality? No, and that's where everybody went wrong for the past 4,000 years. I'll just It's not strictly true, but past 2,000 years, definitely. Past 200 years, psychotically. So the illusion that the center of any geometric system is zero is the fundamental mistake in physics today that affects everything. It's why we can't solve the quantum paradox. And it's also the reason why all of our astronomical calculations of supermassive black holes in the universe and galaxy rotation, all wrong. The interpretation of galaxy morphology, the interpretation of the active galactic nucleus, the interpretation of quasars, even the interpretation of space, is completely befuddled with a linear conception of a center that's zero, that's null, that doesn't exist. And so we need a different number for a different operator. Because it's a different object, and this is the synthetic step. When you have this number, and you have a number for the center, which we have not defined. We only have a number for the edge. Well, remember that the linear edges are plus and minus that add the zero. These are the spherical edges, the center and the edge. Those are the poles of the sphere. And they have two numbers that are not plus and minus. They're infinity over 1, and therefore the center must be the reciprocal. If you can wrap your mind around that, you're going places that you want to go. Because that defines the sphere as a closed system. It has a center that it's a number, but it's not zero. And in fact, the zero does not exist. And that's true to physics. And that has a direct impact on the quantum mechanical problem. It also has a direct impact on our interpretation of universal space all the way to the edge and beyond. Because now we can define a geometric edge that actually is rational. And this is the first ever. Mark my words. This discovery that I made in mathematics is the first ever rational definition of infinity. And it has two aspects that bind physics together into a unit with ramifications that now will be endless. Endless synthesis to a threshold. This is all perceptual space. We're humans. And we still haven't talked about the imaginary space that's outside the edge, that is real, okay? We can't conceptualize it, but now we know what to call it. It's what is beyond the edge. And the edge has a mathematical definition. Lazy 8, an imaginary number over 1. The most real number is 1. Okay? Now, we need to get the algebra for the system. For the line, it's simple. The algebra is add, and that's it. But it's closed on the line. This system doesn't have add in it. It uses multiply, which has an inverse. That's the reciprocal inverse I just told you. For every big number, there is an equal and opposite little number. But it's not a linear relationship. It's a spherical relationship, and here's how we know that. When you assign a number to the center to define spherical space, it must be the reciprocal of the edge number. The edge number is infinity over 1. Test question. What is the number at the center of spherical geometric space? 1 over infinity. That is the universal infinitesimal. It is the only infinitesimal. And there's a rebound to that, because there's always two sides to everything. We're deferring a paradox to a new construct. Currently, science is locked with a paradox that literally and frighteningly, agonizingly, will never be solved. It cannot be solved. And science is going nowhere. Nowhere. It's worse. It's chasing its own tail. Shows up everywhere. Many worlds theory, the many worlds theory of quantum mechanics, the definition of psychosis. And the universe is expanding. That's the reciprocal psychosis. It's because nobody knows what infinity is at either edge. I do. And now you do too. So let's go on. And we'll cut this off at 45 minutes. So you now have two numbers. One for the edge and one for the center. And we haven't really done anything with it. Well, let's use our tools. What do we have to work with? We have division. Well, we've used that in two places to make two proportional numbers. Are they related? Yes, they're related. How do you know that? How would they be related? On multiply, on the inverse, correct? So if you have 1 over infinity and infinity over 1, multiply them. What do they make? I think you know. It's second grade algebra. Infinity over 1 times 1 over infinity is 1. If you have the center, which is less than any other number, and the edge, which is bigger than any other number, and you multiply them to a number, where is the number? It's in between the center and the edge. That's the center of proportional space. Is 1. What's its shape? It's a sphere. And now comes the mind stretch, the test of your manhood as a scientist. Can you pass the acid test? Because this is it. So get ready. I'm going to challenge you right down to your core. But if you pass this test, you're going to get everything. So here it is, the secret of the universe. When you multiply those two numbers together, and they multiply to 1, and it makes a sphere, how far is that sphere from the center? How far is that sphere from the edge? It's in between, isn't it? Yeah, it sure is. And what's its value? 1. Okay. So now we have a 1 that's in the shape of a sphere that's at the center of the proportional number system. That's the Archimedean. To the same proportion that 0 is the Archimedean of plus minus infinity, the sphere with a value of 1 is the Archimedean of plus and minus infinity in spherical space, but it's not plus and minus. You know what the relationship is between plus infinity and minus infinity? Every school child can answer that, so just give your, it's not a trap. What is the Archimedean of plus and minus infinity? It's 0. Well, what's the Archimedean of proportional infinity with reciprocal proportional infinity? It's 1. The multiplicative identity. So this is multiplicative space. We abbreviate it to that. There's a better term for it. It's proportional space. And the two numbers that go into one number, just as with a complex number, except in a sense both of these are imaginary. The imaginarity is in the denominator at the center, and the imaginarity is in the numerator at the edge, and nothing inside the sphere is imaginary. That is real. So this universe, this geometric, axiomatic beginning to the spatial universe, this is only space, is spherical, it's closed. Let's prove that it's closed. This is a numeric space. This is what mathematics has been praying for or hoping for forever. The Greeks gave up on this because they could not compute the circle and therefore could not compute the sphere. And nobody saw the answer. And Einstein didn't see the answer, and nobody's seen the answer. Only I have seen the answer. So I'm giving you the answer that only one man on the planet knows right now. So I hope you have some sense of awe or reverence or at least trust to go on with me one more step. We now have a center that's not a point. So that raises another paradox, because now we have virtually two centers. We have a sphere, which is the center. That's what I'm saying. The sphere is the center. Then what is the center of the sphere? It's imaginary. So the inside of the sphere is imaginary. That is the infinitesimal boundary to real space. Going in, you can't reach the center. You reach the center when you reach one, and whatever is inside is anti-space. And that's the right name for it, but we have to define that. We can only do that in hyperspheric geometry, which I invented. And it's consistent and closed, because spherical space is closed, coherent, and consistent, invalidating Kurt Gödel's incompleteness theorem. This is the solution to the Gödel incompleteness paradox. It's spheric space itself. It's a mathematic and geometric system that describes physical reality. And now we need to go on so we can test it. For consistency, according to what physics already knows, this will be the experimental proof step to prove its value. Nothing I said can be denied. It's all true, but is it useful? Oh, man, is it ever. Let's find out why. You have a 1 that's a sphere with imaginary space inside. Outside the sphere, it goes to an edge, which has imaginary space on the outside. So now you have imaginary space on the outside, a rational boundary, a real interior, and a limit going in that is the number 1, inside of which is a spherical space going in, is also imaginary. We have to circle back to define what this imaginarity is in both senses, in and out. We're getting there, but I think if you're thinking ahead, your mind is racing, because this solves everything. So, given our axiomatic hypothetical construction is still as hypothetical because we haven't defined its usefulness, let's proceed. We're using 1 as one of our indexes to compose the space, because 1 is in the denominator at the edge and 1 is in the numerator at the center. So 1 is involved. That's the uni in universe. So the universe can be considered geometrically closed between two imaginary spaces. One at the center, which is infinitesimal and therefore imaginary, and the other one is integral. It's integral space. So the integral imaginary and the infinitesimal imaginary multiply to reality, which begins at the surface of the sphere. But going out it's real all the way to the edge. Let's fill it with numbers, shall we? Logically, consistently, computably, and everything else that defies Kurt Gödel's incompleteness theorem, this will be absolutely complete to a new threshold unheard of in the annals of science. You have a spherical center. It's an absolute center because it has no interior. Just think of it that way for now, because it's imaginary. Well, you can't imagine it. Just say it's not there. That center is therefore indivisible, right? Yeah, you can't break it. You can't get inside because it's imaginary. Now, that doesn't mean it's completely impenetrable. We don't know that yet. But mathematically it is. In terms of reality. Reality is not in there. And reality is not beyond the edge. They're real, but we can't prove it yet. But it does something magical. It creates the universe that is computable. Let's get the numbers. We have one number. It's 1 over 1. If you multiply infinity over 1 times 1 over infinity, it leaves 1 over 1. Why? That's a very difficult question to answer. And you can think about it maybe in dream time. I certainly did. But what happens to infinity when you create reality? Well, you're left with something you need to look at again, and we will. But so far, no contradictions. No contradictions anywhere. Makes perfect sense. You achieve the sphere by multiplying the two-edged numbers. Nothing could be simpler. But it leaves a paradox about the actual geometric center. Except for now, that there's nothing inside the sphere. Okay? To the same proportion that there's nothing outside the edge. These are the two edges that have reciprocal imaginarity. That means that these are two imaginary spaces that have a relationship that will be solved with hyperspheric geometry. And that'll be in the next lecture. I'm sorry I raised my voice and got excited, but I think you can understand why I might. I'm trying to get this out so it can be understood, but to close this off so we have closure, let's get the numbers. Except for now, that since we have an index of 1 in the system, that we're just going to use whole numbers. That actually can be proved. And Max Planck assisted us in this insight, and so did John Horton Conway, to know what to do next with the numbers when you're not using linearity. There's no linearity in this system, so these are spheric numbers. So they describe spheres. So we're now going to construct the universe instead of with a line and a grid and a 3D grid and then a 4D imaginary grid, which helps because there's imaginarity in there. That's time-space or space-time. We don't want that because it's linear, but we do want exactly what it does right in spheric space. Can we get that? Much more easily. Here's how. When you have the surface and space is going out, remember this is just space. There's no time because no geometry incorporates time until you get to space-time, but that's incorrect. And I've shown why in prior lectures. Because it's linearized. We don't want to do that if we don't have to, although we have to do it at the last step. I've proved that that can be done, as with complex numbers, to get the linear numbers out of spherical numbers so they're computable. So that's the calculus. That's what it's for. It's a simple differential. It's a derivative extraction. Use the calculus, which does involve irrationality, but in our space, that irrationality does not exist. It only exists in linear space. Only linear space composes irrational numbers. Spheric space does not. It begins at 1 over 1. Now, where are the numbers? Going out, we have to find out the numbers that fill space. Well, these will be the only numbers for now, while it's space. And I hope that tantalizes you. What's the first number after 1? 2. So we do the same thing we did with infinity. It's a 2-component number because the 2-component number that makes 1 are the 2 reciprocal infinities. That's the only time we ever have infinity is at the base step. And you can see that solves for infinity, such that it's rational. But it leaves, there's still a hole, but it's a hole in hyperspheric space. It's not in spheric space. Those 2 numbers are outside the system. They only work when they work together, and then they make 1, unity. The center of spheric space is not inside, it's only outside. We're going to find out that what is inside is time. But that is actually quite an interesting mathematical proposition which I've solved, but it's in a future step. So hold that thought and trust me for now that we will be able to deal with the interior of the sphere. But for now, we won't, because we're only dealing with space. So what's between the center and the edge? Well, the numbers are, what do they look like? Okay, so you have 1 over 1 is the center. That's equivalent to 0 in linear space, by the way. It's exactly the same center, only not a linear center. The spheric center seems to have a volume. Hold that thought, because that, again, is the conundrum, is we can see that there's something inside the sphere. Well, actually, we can't, and quantum mechanics proves that. We actually can't see inside that sphere. Why not? We can see it with our eyes in our perceptual space. There's an interior to the sphere, unless it's a dimensionless point. Well, it's not a dimensionless point. This is the point center. It has a radius, but it's imaginary. All right, that's enough of that. You accept the fact that we still have to deal with the interior, right? Yes. What about the surface? Well, that has a value. That's 1, but that's where it ends. There's nothing less than 1. Very interesting statement. So there's nothing less than 1, so all the numbers that make spherical space are positive numbers. Well, that makes sense. That's distance. Well, it's spherical distance. It's not linear distance. It's spherical distance. So what do those numbers look like? Well, you need a shell, don't you? So what's the infinitesimal jump that gets you out to the edge, which you can't reach? You can reach the center. The center is real, but the edge is not. The edge you can't reach. Well, there's the solution geometrically, if you would. To the same proportion that you can't penetrate the edge, you can't even reach the edge. You can reach the center, but you can't go inside. That's the proportionality in imaginary space. We'll come back to that. I'm tempted to say we'll circle back to that, but actually we'll sphere back to that. We'll hypersphere back to that. So Max Planck and John Horton Conway, and there's several other ways to get at this, but the proof of the next number is based on the index of 1. 1 is the central number. But it's not 1. It's 1 over 1. So what's the next number? It's 2 over 1, correct? Yes. Accept that for now. I've proved it, but you actually, unless you can see it really rapidly, you'll have to trust me that 2 over 1 is the first number after 1 over 2. I'm sorry, after 1 over 1. Well, you can see the 2 reciprocal numbers. This one is 2 over 1. Therefore, this number is 1 over 2. because they multiply to 1. So which number is space? It's 2 over 1. Well, what's 1 over 2? Here's the secret that I'm going to leave you with and close this off at 1 hour. The two numbers, 1 over 2 and 2 over 1, are not polar opposites. Plus 1 and negative 1 are polar opposites that add to 0. But 2 over 1 and 1 over 2 are multiplicative numbers, that is proportional numbers, that multiply to 1. And 2 over 1 is the space number. What's 1 over 2? Guess. That'll be in the next lecture. Stay tuned and don't forget to keep looking up. When the skies part at night, look up. Okay? That's where you're going to validate everything. There's no other way. You're going to have to look and you're going to have to think. It's fun, don't worry. If you're afraid, don't be. You won't lose your mind. You know why? When you look out into deep space and you get that funny feeling that you're looking into infinity and then you kind of lose track of time, that's what you're doing. When you look into infinity, you're losing track of time. Your mind won't let you do that for very long because of centrifugal force. You're feeling the effect of centrifugal force. And if you can wrap your mind around that, you're starting to see the ultimate mystery of the universe, which we can convert to rational logic using geometry to get the basis of mathematics, to get the basis of physics. And from that, we're going to discover what the supermassive black hole actually is, and we're going to solve the quantum paradox. I've been promising that for months. I've tried to give you every insight I can, but in the next lecture, I'm just going to tell you, and we're not going to stop. From this point forward, you're going to get nothing but the answer. So be sure you understand everything I said in this lecture. So the first number in spherical space beyond the center to make space is 2. What's the next number? 4. What's the next number? 8. Could it be 1, 2, 3? It could be. And you can do that, but you'll have a problem when you reach 3 over 1. 2 over 1 and 1 over 2 are both representable numbers, but 1 over 3 is not. You know why? It's a repeating decimal fraction. We can't have that. And so these are harmonic numbers. Harmonic numbers are the dyadic fractions and the binary counting numbers. 1 over 1 is the center. Then 2 over 1, 4 over 1, 8. 2 to the 4th, 2 to the 5th, 2 to the 6th. These are the concentric rings going out that fill space. And that fills space with gaps, doesn't it? Those gaps can be filled, but not with space. And the answer is going to surprise you because it's not time, although we perceive it as time. What fills those gaps is the most baffling and elusive quantity in the universe. And I solved it. So you're going to be able to see the quantum paradox and the actual construction of macroscale objects all the way to the universe itself, although don't expect ever to know the origin of the universe. That cannot be ever achieved. No one will ever know the origin of the universe. Because if you knew the origin of the universe, it could be proved that you know everything about the universe. That's impossible. And so there is no origin to the universe. There is no origin to unity. Unity is original. And that one, you might want to start thinking religiously and come down off of your narcissistic, prideful, king of the universe man and start looking at things from the right point of view of who you are with respect to that. That is wisdom. This is Intergalactic giving you the secret of the universe. I hope that helps you. We'll be back with much more, but I'm not going to stop anymore. This is going to go all the way to the end until I drop dead, because it never ends. But this is a new threshold to physics. This has been a long time coming. This will dispel the psychotic miasma of pseudoscience. We'll be right back. Intergalactic.